The basic operating functions for Kalashnikov series rifles, AK-47, 74, 100 series, are relatively basic. Just to learn to operate them, it doesn't take much time or practice. There is significant difference between just learning to operate the rifle and learning to operate it to a degree where your movements, your actions in operating the rifle developed a little bit beyond the level of just muscle memory. The thought process should be absent in the sense that when you need to just basically operate the rifle to make it combat capable, combat ready, whether it would be changing the magazine, working the safety lever or charging handle, these are, no pun intended, should be no-brainers. Your thought process should be focused more towards the action in front of you or around you, as the situation may be. And the actions of operating your weapon, you should develop the attributes of automaticity. To do that, it takes a lot of repetition. It takes challenging yourself and doing the same actions with different body alignment on the move, eventually getting to a level where you do it under duress, inducing that stress in training by various means. There are 4 basic components in operating the Kalashnikov series rifles: safety lever, charging handle, magazine change, and trigger. The next component of 4 that we have identified in the basic rifle operation is a trigger. This instructional material not being focused on marksmanship, we're just briefly going to touch upon it. There's plenty of material out there that shooting public and AK owners can access pretty easily to find pretty good detailed explanations and good information as far as the trigger reset, taking off the slack, not slapping the trigger, and all the other issues that people deal with the marksmanship, where not working on those skills, it affects negatively your ability to hit what you're aiming at and to administer immediately follow-up shots. This is more about what happens before you pull the trigger, what happens after you pull the trigger. If I had to put the numbers on percentages on the numerous processes, numerous attributes that are present in the gunfight, I would say that marksmanship is about 10%, albeit very important 10% of skills required. To students of violence, I would suggest that about 50% of their training has to be spent in the dry fire environment, practicing the skills that, again, we can break down in numerous components. And only a small part of it is administrative weapon handling and manipulations.
While safety both in training and during combat deployment of the firearms is an extremely important issue, it should not affect in a negative way the ability to train with the firearms in a manner that resembles the possible reality of a gunfight, as well as one's efficiency and effectiveness in combat itself. Traditional finger off the trigger approach is a good basic preventive measure to address the issue of accidental or undesired discharge. The more pronounced trigger finger extension further away from the trigger, while it may marginally improve on prevention of accidental discharges, at the same time it may negatively affect the mechanics of proper trigger work in situations where surprise stimuli will warrant rapid engagement. Properly controlled, quick and smooth operation of the trigger is one of the cornerstones of marksmanship. The dogmatic training approach to very strict and often hyperextended trigger finger positioning may result in less than optimal trigger operation under stress, negatively affecting your marksmanship. Different approach to finger of the trigger issue is having your trigger finger inside a trigger guard, exerting outward pressure.
For experienced and proficient operators, finger inside the trigger guard with the nail bed of your trigger finger pushing outwards against the trigger guard. As you can see here, my finger is in contact with the trigger, yet the pressure is being exerted outwards towards the inside of the trigger guard. What you achieve with this approach to finger off the trigger moment is that you are in contact with the trigger, which will allow you, when the situation dictates that you need to very quickly depress the trigger, it will allow you a lot smoother operation of the trigger, as opposed to having your finger outside of the trigger guard in this fashion, and then when the situation very quickly requires you to pull the trigger, you're gonna have, for the lack of better term, couple bumps. First is your finger sliding off of the outside of a trigger guard and slapping the trigger itself. That may affect not only the accuracy of your initial shot, that may affect the accuracy of your follow-up shot as well. That is not the approach that I would suggest to novice shooters. That is for people that are experienced, that train a lot, that may have actual experience. Other important moment in here is that when you have your finger inside the trigger guard exerting the pressure outwards with the nail of your finger towards the trigger guard while still maintaining contact with the trigger itself, I would suggest initially, for obvious reasons in the dry environment, just holding your rifle at ready position and have your partner, training partner, start pushing, moving you and so forth, just to see what's going on with your finger, whether you're losing control, have him push your elbows, your shoulders, and obviously you try to avoid any kind of change in your trigger finger alignment and its positioning, and obviously paying attention where you don't. Okay? And then gradually ask your partner to get behind you where you don't have a visual stimuli, so to speak, and it's unexpected pushes, okay, on your shoulders, on your hips, on your back, on wherever. Okay? Sometimes he may pull instead of push, whatever the case might be. And you're just watching how your trigger finger is in that position, whether you have any kind of tendency to where trigger would be pushed, pulled, or affected in any way, shape, or form. Obviously, with time, in the environment that I was trained in, eventually there came the time where this was done with live round chambered, and the stimuli being exerted against you by your training partners was quite severe. Pretty powerful kicks being dropped to the ground, pushed, grabbed by the neck and so forth, your rifle being moved around to see if your trigger finger control is sufficient to maintain such a position that allows you for much more efficient trigger work on the initial shot. Thus, of course, going into your follow-up shots, you also gain advantage of time and accuracy.